in the chat you wouldn't mind letting us know, so that the farmers and I also have a sense of what interests you about CT food. So if you wouldn't mind taking a quick second to write your thought in the chat. Is it that you enjoy buying local? Perhaps you are a farmer yourself. Perhaps you are new to farming, wanted to learn from some experts. Let me know. Let us know in the chat. Type a couple of words about why it is that you care about Connecticut food. And while you're busy doing that, I already see things like love local veggies. So thanks for letting us know a little bit about who's on the call here. I want to just say a couple words about what CFT is. So the Connecticut Farmland Trust is, sorry, I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit more of an immersive experience. All right. Apparently I am not going to do that. All right. Great. So the Connecticut Farmland Trust, just to say a couple of words about that before I introduce our farmers. We really focus on two main things. We focus on protecting farmland, and we do that primarily through agricultural easements, which essentially are the development rights to property. And we hold those easements in perpetuity that protect, basically provide some restrictions about how you can use farmland, ensuring that the farmland remains in farming. We also have some work that we do, and we have a webinar coming up next week that's going to talk about a program called FarmLink that we do with the Connecticut Department of Agriculture, helping new farmers who are or longtime farmers connect to more farmland, from connecting to people who have land that they aren't currently farming. So there's a few ways that we work to support farmers as well, and in particular new and beginning farmers are really our priorities. So I am excited to begin some introductions. We're going to start the webinar series with, we're going to start the presentation section with Amanda Freund of Freund's Family Farm. Farmer Amanda Freund is a third-generation dairy farmer, and I'm not going to steal all of your thunder, Amanda. I'll let you say what you think is maybe the most important thing, but I do want to highlight that Amanda really is doing a lot of work in addition to the farming. She helps sustain 3 farm-related businesses. So, of course, the 300-cow dairy, which includes a robotic milking machines, a retail farm market and bakery owned by her family, and cowpots, which I think she'll say a little bit more about what cowpots are all about. The farm itself, Freund Family Farm, has been a leader in environmental sustainability in the state, installing more than 1,000 solar panels for its own electricity. And not only is Amanda a shrewd and hardworking business person working and devoted to the long-term health of the herd. But if you've heard of Cabot Cheese, it might just be because of Amanda's work as their spokesperson. She spends time traveling around the country as a keynote motivational speaker at Women in Agriculture and other agriculture leader conferences on topics of economic diversification, sustainability, and being a young female farmer in the US. So we're very fortunate to have you here today, Amanda. And I'll let you take the stage, and I'll start your PowerPoint.
Thank you so much, Kimball. We were just talking before you all were entered into this space. Kimball and I know each other from an earlier life. So I lived in New Haven for a short while working for Congresswoman DeLauro. So my shoe wear has changed drastically since 2007 when I was putting on heels that now I look at and I laugh at the fact that I could have even possibly walked anywhere with those on. But I start my day with my muck boots on, and my first chore of the day is feeding our cows. So I work really closely with our dairy nutritionist and then the team on my farm that does the cropping and harvesting, so that every single day I'm delivering quality and nutritious food to the animals that we then as a family have been relying on to support us by producing milk for 70 plus years. So Kimball covered a lot of ground. And so I created a presentation that is largely pictures so that you have a backdrop for what I'm talking about. And then I look forward to being able to elaborate on a lot of those things during the Q&A portion. But this is an aerial view of our dairy barn. So we moved into that large barn that is at the forefront of the picture there in 2016. So when it comes to cows and barns, that's a pretty new facility. And I call it the Taj Mahal of dairy barns because those cows have water beds and misting fans and back scratchers, and they choose their own milking schedule. So we'll get into that. And I also intentionally set up my picture there so that it covered the wet spot in the field. So these are real life working conditions. Not every field is pristine. And that one has a big old wet spot in the back. But and just to give you a little bit of a layout of the land, next to the barn to the left there, those little white cubes, those are our calf hutches. So during the summer months, those actually accommodate our baby calves because they get independent housing until they're weaned and they can go into a group pen together. And then next door to that is our cow pots factory, where we're turning our cow's manure into biodegradable pots. And then next to that is a greenhouse structure where my mom grows about 1,500 tomato plants for our retail farm market. And next to that is another greenhouse where we raise our baby calves during the winter months when it's colder. So there's our 3 farm businesses all captured in this picture. We're all kind of tied in, even though we're running separate books. We all work closely together. Next slide, Kimball. So this is the crew. Actually, it's grown since this picture was taken. There were twins that were born a couple years ago. We haven't given them any physical tasks yet, but they have discovered that that concrete floor in front of our cow bunk makes for a perfect platform to race their tricycles. So this is my crew. So brothers Matt and Ben, the 2 middle-aged men in the picture, they took on the dairy farm from my grandpa Gene, who started the farm with my grandma Esther in 1950. And so what you're looking at here is 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generations on my family's dairy farm. And as Kimball mentioned, there's 3 independent businesses here. There's the farm market, cow pots, and then our dairy farm, which is a member of the Cabot Cooperative. Next slide. So the cornerstone, the foundation of this farm is the cow. Her priorities and needs are our first priority. So I feed them breakfast before I get my own breakfast. And so these are the animals that have provided for us and allowed us to maintain about 500 acres of open space that is being used to grow the crops to feed them. And then about 150 acres of forest land. So these are the ladies that make it economically viable for us to be able to maintain the farmland and the open space. And when I thought about the tone for this conversation being the future of farming and growing and producing food for the future, our ability to have brought my grandpa's dairy farm from 1950, which he was milking cows into individual buckets. I mean, the way that we milk cows and the barn that those cows were housed in has changed a lot, but the priority of animal care has remained the same. And so there is a commitment to continuous improvement. So as we learn more about what a cow needs and requires to be healthy and well, we adopt those practices. So knowing that good, clean air and nice natural light. I mean, if you look at the barn where my grandpa started milking cows in 1950, we're a far stretch from that. But it's because we've learned so much. and adopting new technology. So this picture that you're looking at, there's that top right picture is Juno, the feed pusher. So every hour on the hour, that little R2D2 robot basically does like kind of like a Roomba style, but instead of sucking it up, it's pushing the food back closer to the cows, and it chirps as it does it. So that the cow that's laying down and she hears that sound, she knows that there's some fresh feed for her. And then below that, you're looking at our robotic milker. So there's 5 of these units, and it's a voluntary system. So when the cow decides that she wants to come and get milked, instead of an employee being in the pit of our milking parlor for 6 hours in the afternoon and 6 hours in the middle of the night, these robots are milking cows 24 hours a day, and it is voluntary. So our cows choose when they want to get milked, if it's 2 in the morning or 11 a.m. And on average, that visit takes about 7.5 minutes. And on average, our cows are visiting 3 times a day. So in a 24-hour period, our cows are being milked for about 21 minutes. And then lastly, I just want to point out the fact that part of our ability to come into the 21st century as dairy farmers has involved our participation in a third-party animal welfare audit, which is managed through this Farmers Assuring Responsible Management program. Next slide. And so, oh, one too many. There you go. In addition to capturing that solar energy off of that barn roof that you saw in the first slide, we also have the longest continuously running methane digester in the country. So we have been capturing the methane from our cow's manure since 1997 and burning that as an alternative to propane and heating oil. So we're actually capturing renewable energy from our cow's manure, which, mind you, we actually are technically in the business of producing milk, but we have discovered how to turn our cow's byproduct into an incredibly valuable asset on this farm. So that's energy. That's also bedding. So this picture on the bottom that you're looking at with our cows on their water beds, on top of that water bed, we also have put a layer of our dehydrated and composted manure solids, which is what is in that shovel picture. This is also what is fertilizing our 500 acres of cropland. So we're re-nourishing that soil each year to be able to grow the crops and have the energy to grow those crops to feed our cows. So it's a full cycle. And then lastly is beyond the energy and the bedding and the fertilizer is finding a way to add value to that manure. So next slide. So as Kimball mentioned, we manufacture a product called cow pots on our farm. And that top right picture is a showcase of the range of sizes. So from 3 inches to 17 inches. And this has been developed as a way for us to meet our environmental goals and only apply as much fertilizer to our land base as that land necessitates. But then being able to take what manure is remaining beyond that and not just, selling it for $20 a yard to a landscaper, but actually making it valued at $100 a pound, which is exceptional because our milk doesn't get that kind of price. Next. So hopefully it shows up with, okay, there we go. So over the years, we've gotten quite a few awards and recognitions, and we also have been able to identify our product as being 100% bio-based. Next. And one of our newest pursuits that we're only in the beginning phases of is not just making biodegradable pots for horticultural use, but also making packaging corners. So being able to provide the packaging industry a renewable and biodegradable alternative to styrofoam or other products, but being able to make that from our cow's manure. Next. And then the third business is our farm market bakery and garden center. And so this, it is my mom's pursuit. She evolved this farm business from being a roadside, bushel of corn that we would pick and sell during the middle of summer. And it was on the honor system. The people would just leave a couple bucks. And now it is a year-round venue for selling local products, foods that we produce in our own commercial kitchen. And in fact, and we're going to get to some conversation about how the pandemic has affected our farm. But one of the really exceptionally cool things from the past 2 years is that our local food pantry, some of the donations that they've received have been, especially in the very beginning of this pandemic, when there was a shortage of retail size products because there were so many people that were relying on the grocery store rather than going to a restaurant. So all these bulk wholesale quantities of yogurt and sour cream suddenly didn't have a market because restaurants were shut down. And so those items were being delivered to pantries, but pantries didn't necessarily have a way to utilize it. And so we, over the past 2 years, have grown this incredible relationship with our local pantry where we can turn their wholesale commodity scale size sour cream into biscuits and sour cream coffee cake. And we can turn that out of our bakery and then bring it back to the pantry for them to deliver to the people in our community. So anyways, this is just a small smattering of what Teresa delivers from our farm market. But what's very cool from a dairy farmer perspective is that this becomes the public face of our family business. And it's a platform to be able to talk about what we're doing to care for our cows, while we also have a full lineup of Cabot cheese that we sell from our market. Next. And so thinking about the future, the expectation and understanding of our community when my grandpa started farming in 1950 and their ties to agriculture were very different than we are today. The average consumer is 3 generations removed from production agriculture. And so it is our job, in addition to growing crops and feeding cows, to connect and communicate with the people that we rely on to consume our product. And so for our family, that has involved developing a video series about sustainability because we know that's top of mind with consumers. Hosting strolls and tours of our farm, taking every opportunity to have tours and pictures. And so if you had bought salted butter from Cabot over the past year, that family pictured on the back of the package, that's us, that's my family. And we're also on the 2-pound block of pepper jack cheese that Costco offers. And so our cooperative has recognized that the farmers need to be the front of our brand. So we have this nationally recognized brand, but at the end of the day, people want to connect with their farmers. And so we're putting our faces on that packaging. We send out a biannual newsletter to about 2,400 mailing addresses each year. And as of last week, I can add podcasting to our list of platforms where we're connecting with people where they're at. Not everybody can come onto our farm. So if I can get in the car with them, I'm going to take that opportunity. Next. And, yep. So this is the second to last slide. Recognizing that this is a conversation that's being hosted by Connecticut Farmland Trust, we are committed to ensuring that this land base can continue to feed the next generation. And it might not be growing the same crops, but you better believe that we have built up the soils to accommodate whatever the growing interest is at that time. So this past year, we worked with NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, to improve the waterways in our fields because we have been experiencing more substantial rain events, and our fields have absolutely flooded and have absolutely affected crop yields. And so we're working to build our fields so that they can not just sustain that kind of weather event, but they can still produce the yields that we're expecting and relying on. And so that middle picture that you're looking at is our strip crop field. So we've actually put our perennial crop, the grass, in the sections of the field that have steeper slopes, and then our annual crop, the corn, in the sections of the field that are more level. And then there is a waterway that's been built through that. We've also put it in drainage tile. So this is all because we are experiencing a changing climate, and we need to be able to build our land and our soil base to be able to accommodate that. And then this bottom picture you see is the very beginning germination of our cover crop from last fall. So every single field that is growing our annual plant, the corn, as soon as that corn is harvested, that mixed grass seed is applied to the field so that there is a root structure there to hold that topsoil in place through the winter season. Next. And so that's a wrap for me. I think I might have taken like 3 minutes too long. But I live in such a remarkably and incredibly beautiful place, and it is my job to share that space with people. So it is no longer like, oh, this is private property, stay back. This is, I love where I live, and I want you to also appreciate everything that we're doing to make this space an environmental and socially sustainable platform to grow food. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amanda, for sharing that. That's definitely really interesting. And we're going to have time to ask Amanda questions as well as Baylee questions. I want to launch into a quick introduction of Baylee Drown so that we have an opportunity to hear from both farmers before we launch into some questions about trends in Connecticut food going forward and for your own business plans. Baylee, I think I've got your PowerPoint all queued up as well, so I should be able to get going with that really quickly. But just very briefly, Baylee actually grew up on a conventional dairy farm in Michigan. But while earning her bachelor's degree, she took a course that led her to a deeper dive into organic and sustainable regenerative farming, and moved to Connecticut recently to work on developing her own business, and developed a community-supported agriculture model primarily that was working. And then the opportunity came to actually partner with some folks who had preserved their land with the Connecticut Farmland Trust. And she and her partner, Ryan Quinn, ended up buying that farm and have created an even bigger farming operation there. One of the things that strikes me a lot about Baylee when I was reading up to be able to introduce her a little bit for this podcast is just sort of the potential that Baylee sees in so many different things. In Connecticut, for example, for more hyper-local sustainable vegetable production. And just a certain enthusiasm for farming and regenerative practices that is inspirational to me. So I think that you will be inspired as well. And Baylee, feel free to unmute yourself, and I'll start sharing your slideshow.
Hi, thank you so much for the warm introduction, Kimball. I wanted to just address Amanda briefly. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I think that our two farms next to each other are a great illustration of sustainability in many different forms, and how sustainability is really for all farms and for all businesses. That sustainability has a lot of different faces, and I think that we're both really good representations of different perspectives on sustainability, but really we're working towards a very similar goal. And I just really enjoyed looking at your farm and your presentation, and I appreciate your sharing that with us today. So I moved to Connecticut about 10 years ago. I was farming in Vermont. And a lot of my friends said at that time, who were also farmers in Vermont and knew that I love farming in Vermont, they said, why Connecticut? That's such a suburban place. Why would you want to start a farm there? And I think that Connecticut is really interestingly positioned to feed a large population. And we have a lot of assets that are sometimes underestimated by other parts of New England. If you go to the next slide, I will give you a little deeper dive into my history. So I grew up on a Midwestern dairy farm. That's my little brother and I showing some Holstein cows at the local county fair. And I was very involved in FFA and 4-H growing up. I learned a lot of leadership and responsibility. And I encourage anybody with kids in a local 4-H group to definitely consider having your children enrolled in that. it just does so much to build a kid's character and their responsibility. And I'm really grateful for growing up on a 300 cow dairy, much like Amanda. My family did sell their cows in the mid-90s. They still have their land. Unfortunately, there's so much development encroaching around their farmland. It's a little nerve-wracking for me. Just that they are able to hold on to the farmland and rent it out to a larger dairy, but it's always a threat. There's constantly people stopping by trying to buy land for development. So I think the work that Connecticut Farmland Trust does is absolutely essential as a person whose family farm is constantly threatened by development. If you go to the next slide, that'd be great. So this is my family in front of our barn that was recently torn down, and it was built in 1919. It was called the Show Barn. And we housed our dairy cattle in the basement. Initially, my mother, who is in the brown shirt, she grew up putting the belly bands on the cows. So that's a little milking machine that you put underneath the cow's belly and it collects the milk. A little different technology than a robotic milker. And these are my grandparents, and they're still on the farm, and they're still growing 5 acres of sweet corn every summer, which is more than what Quinn and I grow. We grow very intensively though. If you go to the next slide. This is where I learned about organic diversified production. This is Green Mountain College. I received my master's degree there while I was farming there for 3 years. I had the pleasure of farming with this crew and several other different people. And we grew about 4 acres of vegetables, which is very similar to what my farm currently does. We also had management intensive rotational grazing for cattle. We grew pigs, we grew chickens, and all of that food went into our cafeteria as well as to a CSA. And so these folks were very instrumental in my growth into an organic, integrated, diversified farmer. If you go to the next slide. And this is where we started our farm in Old Lyme. This is our first year turning the soil there. And it's expanded from about a 1 acre field in the first year to now we're growing on about 4 acres, but we're able to actually grow 6 acres of vegetables on 4 acres through intensive methods and a lot of soil care. So we actually will get 2 to 3 crops off of certain plots of land per season, and then we'll put a cover crop in at the end of the year to maintain the soil through winter, which is a practice you heard Amanda talk about as well. It's really important. Next slide. So this is our farm on Beaverbrook Road, and that's my husband, Quinn. He left teaching to join me on the farm, and he's been instrumental in developing the infrastructure on our farm. We started with almost nothing. I started with a $100 gift card and a lot of student loan debt, this farm about 8 years ago. So having the support of our community and the state of Connecticut and NRCS grants has allowed us to develop our infrastructure on the farm over the last 8 years. And now we're at a scale of feeding 170 families through our CSA. So that's all of their vegetable needs and some fruits. We're also growing pork and duck eggs at this time as well. If you can go to the next slide. So with all that being said, we were welcome to Connecticut agriculture. And at the time when I was looking to my next step in life, I was farming in Vermont, and people are a little critical of Connecticut agriculture. It has a reputation of maybe being a little more suburban and a little less rural than Vermont. But the competition for starting a vegetable farm in Vermont is intense. There are a ton of small direct marketing vegetable farms in Vermont. And Connecticut, in my town in Lyme, had 0 vegetable farms direct marketing. So there's a population of people that want local food, and not as many farms per capita as we have in Vermont. I've also found that the climate here along the coastline is incredible for growing vegetables. We have a really moderate climate that's similar to Japan's. And the local population in my town in Lyme really loves supporting our farm. They are a lot of them are tremendously educated about the values of local food. And if they don't come at it from an institutional knowledge type of perspective, then they at least understand the value of quality of produce. And that's how we're able to compete with grocery store produce, is we compete on quality. So those are some of the reasons that drew me down to Connecticut from Vermont, which, arguably their local food system is a little more advanced in the infrastructure they have built up over the years. If you would advance, that'd be great. Here's another asset of Connecticut agriculture. We have some incredible soils, especially along the Connecticut River Valley. This is an old map of soils, but there are a lot of little pockets of prime soils. And that is quite different from where I grew up in the Midwest, where the tracts of land are more vast and there's less diversity of different soil types. This diversity has been an advantage to us because with the dramatic shift in climate and how our climate has become a little less predictable over the last few years, having this diversity of different soil types means that we are better positioned to deal with erratic weather. So specifically drainage, which Amanda talked about in her presentation. If you have lands that hold water and drain at different rates, then you have a greater resiliency for extreme weather. So you might be able to farm one field earlier and one field later, just because of the diversity of soil types that we have in Connecticut. If you would advance. And to my other point about Connecticut agriculture is we have these massive populations within 2 hours. So my experience in sustainable ag education and networking with new farmers is a lot of them are serving these 2 large populations from Connecticut. We're really well positioned between these high population density places where we can bring fresh, locally or at least regionally grown food to these populations, as well as serving our local populations, like we do with feeding our neighbors through our CSA. And these younger farmers that I have been networking with and helping grow through our apprenticeship program are by and far more queer, more female, and more often people of color than what has historically been the stereotypical farmer, which is older and male and straight. So I think that the future of agriculture, especially the sustainably minded individuals who are getting into agricultural now, is much more diverse than what it has been historically. And I think that's an asset to have a diverse array of perspectives. I know on our farm, it certainly helps us. If you will advance. So one of the pieces of infrastructure that we have put together for our 5-year plan is this beautiful timber frame barn where we are going to be marketing our produce, washing our produce, and as well as housing staff, storing our crops. And we hope to be able to welcome people to this barn this year. If you would advance. This is our farm stand. We market our produce both through the CSA and 2 regional farmers markets. And we also serve some wholesale clientele. If you would advance. These are our crops in the spring last year. We grow at the home farm, which is preserved by Connecticut Farmland Trust, we have about 1.5 acres of vegetables, but we actually get about 3 acres of vegetables from that small field because of intensive methods. We're intensive, yet we take really good care of the soil. So we're adding organic matter. We're keeping the soil covered either with a crop or a cover crop, or even a mulch or a tarp to prevent erosion. And erosion is the #1 threat to agriculture always. So anything you can do to prevent that is always helpful. Great. So just one other thing about the pandemic. I think that we've all suffered with the pandemic, but I think like this series that Connecticut Farmland Trust has put on, there have been some benefits. We've realized that we need to have local resiliency and local dependence. And one of the things that is illustrated is that we need to have processing facilities for our produce and other crops so that we can make value-added crops to direct market. I think direct marketing is one of the greatest ways to make a farm financially viable, because then that farm is able to get the entire food dollar rather than only getting a portion of the food dollar. So I think that's one of the strengths of Amanda's farm, is that they've added value-added processing facilities. And a message to anyone who is working with our state or federal government, that is where Connecticut agriculture is. We need to invest in facilities, slaughterhouses, commercial kitchens, places where farmers can take their product and make something value-added and shelf-ready and shelf-stable. Because we do have a beautiful tapestry of new farmers in Connecticut, diverse farmers with a lot of ambition, and Connecticut agriculture can feed our local residents.
Thanks so much, Baylee, for a thoughtful presentation. And I want to say a couple things before we loose the floodgates on questions. For those of you who have used Zoom before, that's probably very easy for you to figure out some of this stuff. And for some of you, it's going to be new. There is a toolbar down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and one of the items says reactions. If you'd like to ask a question, because we have about 28 people on the call right now, click on the reaction that is raising a hand, so that we'll know to call on you, so we can unmute you one at a time if you've got some questions. And while you're thinking about what it is that you'd like either Baylee or Amanda to elaborate a little bit further on, I'm going to start off with a question, and Amanda or Baylee, either of you feel free to just jump in. The thing I think that strikes me about farming, different from a lot of other businesses, are the incredible number of variables. Some you have control over, and many of which you don't have control over, that affect your business planning. And I'm wondering if there are some trends in particular that you are focused on when you think of something, what's in a year, 5 years from now. Maybe even give me some advice about what's the right time horizon to think of when you're thinking about farm business planning.
I was hoping to see Baylee's microphone go off mute, like she would take the question before me. I mean, that's a big question. So, I love that you have two very different farmer sizes, styles, products, but everything that Baylee said, like, is true, and I agree, and like, yes, like, and so our priorities and our goals are the same, and the scale is different, but like what it is that we're doing is feeding people. That's what I want to do. And I think that is the benefit of being a farmer in Connecticut, is that we are so close to our end consumer. Milk is actually in deficit in the state of Connecticut. So we only produce about 60% of what the population actually consumes. So that means that milk has to come into the state from other places. But this pandemic has been such an incredibly unpredictable experience. Having the 3 different farm businesses, our farm market was busier than it's ever been because people felt more comfortable coming into a small, they felt more comfortable coming into our market rather than going to the large grocery store to get their basic necessities. And so, or we provided them curbside pickup. And then with cowpots, people were stuck at home. So all of a sudden, they were actually starting their own seeds for the first time ever because they weren't stuck in a car commuting. And so those 2 businesses had excellent years in the pandemic, but meanwhile, on the dairy farm, we were actually dumping milk. So we had to ship under a certain amount of milk because our processing facilities couldn't accommodate how much milk was coming in because the retail side of it and the wholesale side of it had been so kind of flipped on their head. So being in a business that you actually get to create and curate and define your market, and having that direct sale to customers is really important to managing the variables, because as a dairy farmer, we are in a commodity market. And so if, down along the supply chain, there's pinches and bottlenecks, it's going to end up kind of being backfilled. And so as the farmer, we suddenly are losing market for our product. And there's nothing you're going to do about that. So being in a place where we have access to a consumer base and making sure that we're always communicating about what we're doing so that the people buying our product feel comfortable and confident that we're doing it right. But, making that huge, going through and putting new drainage tile in all of our cropland, that was a very significant project. And that is something that we're doing because we're thinking about the next 15 years of production from those fields.
Thanks, Amanda. That's really helpful perspective. Baylee, do you want to weigh in on your own farm operations, the trends that you're noticing?
So when it comes to 5-year planning, I think we consider how we want our business to evolve, and that's what we want to grow and what we think people will buy. But we also have to consider climate resiliency and the pandemic, and finishing up our last 5-year plan, which is that big, beautiful barn you saw. So we're kind of at a moment where we're wrapping up one plan and thinking about the next. And when it comes to climate resiliency, I think one of the best investments for our farm, which the USDA has supported, has been our high tunnels. Because of incredibly erratic weather that does not fit with what the growing definitions are from the USDA plant hardiness zones, those tunnels have been incredibly valuable in providing insurance in the spring and fall with frosts. And then secondarily in controlling water and therefore disease. So from a biological standpoint, I think our farm will invest in another tunnel in the next 5 years. And I encourage anybody who's thinking of growing food in the form of plants or even livestock to consider high tunnels as a technology for your farm. And then as the impact of the pandemic has shown us is we as farmers always have to be ready to observe what's happening, react, change our plans based on the pressures of the market, as well as outside external factors like weather. So we just need to always be ready to pivot and try to find a way to use things that we are no longer going to have a market for.
Thanks, Baylee. No, that's there's so much, I suppose, to talk about in the area. I noticed a question came in the chat about whether the availability of labor limits farm production. And Amanda, I think that you responded to that in the chat just a little bit. in terms of being an employer of choice. Baylee, I don't know if you have a lot of labor apart from your own labor.
So yes, we have seasonal people that work on our farm, and I do not have to actively recruit because people are always coming to me wanting to work here for the summer, especially since the pandemic. We don't really have a labor shortage so much as a housing shortage. Our town, it's too expensive for a farm worker to buy a house in Lyme. So we have some on-farm housing options that we're able to create for those people, and where our farm is working towards creating more affordable housing. And I think affordable housing is a statewide issue for Connecticut. I know our town is not in compliance with the state mandated amount of affordable housing, and we're going to start being taxed at a higher rate because of that. So I think that we don't have a labor shortage because we, again, try to be a really good employer and be very attractive to people. But we do have a housing issue.
And I will second that. Housing prices in our community, I mean, just in the past 2 years, I mean, they were bad before, and now they've just gotten even more out of reach for people that are either just starting out or, I mean, to be able to cover the cost of an employee that can accommodate a mortgage for a house locally and based on the price of milk is just not, it's not viable. So we have 3 different housing options where we house our employees just to be able to maintain our workforce. So we've gotten a mortgage so that we can have a house, so that we can support a place for our employees to live. And I guess I'll just comment a little bit further on that. A big part of our adoption of technology and that robotic milking system and the alley scrapers that are cleaning the manure down the pits of our barn, and that's because our employees need to be able to strive towards having more skilled work. So doing the same job every single day and like that's it, that's the extent of your job description, like that gets really boring. And just like anybody, like you want a little bit of diversity in what you do. And so by being able to put that task of milking our cows, which is really such an incredibly critical task on our farm, but to basically take 12 hours of work and be able to displace that towards different work. So instead, those same employees they learned how to trim hooves, and they learned how to breed cows, and they learned how to do some of the healthcare procedures with our calves, with doing some vaccinations. So we've been able to shift what their work is so that they're doing work that feels more fulfilling.
I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. That actually is really interesting. And thanks, Carol, for your question. Are there other folks that have questions for Amanda or Baylee? And I have other questions, but I don't want to monopolize screen time. Are there other questions? This is me doing an appropriately long pause to see if anybody wants to unmute and actually ask a question.
If not, Kimball, it looks like Carol has another question in the chat.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Carol asks, what barriers potentially based on local land regulations would you like to see revised? Would be helpful for your business, your farm business?
I will take this one initially because Carol lives in my town. It is on the zoning board.
So Carol's a plant.
So I would love to see my town adopt the right to farm law of the state before making new zoning regulations, and make sure that our zoning regulations fit with the state protection of farms. I know that a couple of adjacent towns, I don't know if Amanda's town has this, but it just frames the perspective that farms are a part of this town, and that although it's becoming very suburban and residential, the farms have a right to exist, as stinky and noisy as they may be. Although we try not to be stinky because we want to keep all that nitrogen on our farm and recycle it into something else. So that's my perspective. I think that the proposed zoning in our town, they are talking about giving us a little more leeway on how much housing we can offer on the farm for our labor force. And I do appreciate that. So yeah, the right to farm adoption from the state law, and making sure that our local regulations fit with the state protections for farming would be my number one priority.
Thanks, Baylee. Amanda, do you have anything to add related to, you're on the opposite side of the state? Are things, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the town of Canaan still houses or hosts 5 dairy farms. I mean, we have our community and our town has been very industry and agriculture friendly, but that does not mean that we can get too relaxed and comfortable. So, I mean, my dad is on the Wetlands Commission and on the Zoning Board of Appeals. And so we are active in our municipal commissions and committees, because it doesn't take much for, I mean, just in the past 2 years, we've gotten a lot of new transplants from out of town that bought houses locally because they wanted to get out of New York City. And this whole living next to a farm thing is new, and sometimes it does get stinky, and so it does not take much to get someone to want to recommend or push for amended land use restrictions. So to date, we have a very friendly and ag positive community, but that community is always evolving. So we as farmers, I mean, that's why I send out that newsletter to 2,400 mailboxes, because I want to make sure that every single person that drives by my farm each day knows, 1, how to contact me if they have a question or a complaint, and 2, for them to be able to get some news and updates about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Thanks. I'm noticing we've got about 4 minutes left, and I'm wondering if each of you would, well, let's see. I think we have a question out there from Aaron O'Hare. Is that right?
Yes, hi. I've enjoyed tremendously both presentations, took lots of notes. Just could each of you, both of you address, I don't think I heard the word organic today, so I don't know what the current status is with that, but could you address that?
Hi, Erin. So on my farm, we don't use any pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. We only use biological pest controls, mainly nematodes, and then physical barriers. So certified organic is not what we are. We have signed the NOFA Organic Farmers Pledge, and we definitely uphold those values. But for our farm, USDA certified organic does not fit with our definition of sustainability as a whole. I don't really like doing a lot of paperwork. I do the minimum amount of paperwork to running my business, and certified organic would require me to do a lot more paperwork. I have no problem with other people being certified organic, and I think it's better than nothing. I think the certifications you approach as a farm need to fit with your overall farming goals. And that's why we haven't pursued it. We have considered it. But for us, certified organic also doesn't define how we treat our soil. And if you've heard of the Rodale Institute, they've been studying organic practices and other soil techniques for decades. And what they've learned is that returning nutrients to the soil in the form of cow manure increases the fertility of that land for over 40 years versus synthetic fertilizers. So we know that for sure, putting cow manure on land is a good thing long term, and that a low tillage agriculture system that keeps living soil on your farm and prevents erosion, for us, that's a higher priority than becoming certified organic is using cover crops to keep our soil healthy, and doing very low tillage techniques. So that we just find ourselves more as regenerative than certified organic. But a lot of the inputs that I buy in my farm are certified organic inputs. It's just not, it doesn't completely encompass what we want to do as a farm.
Thank you.
That's a really helpful answer, Baylee. And I am recognizing that with 2 minutes left, we probably need to put on a whole separate webinar related to the issues of organic and regenerative agriculture, the differences in how different farmers evaluate their approach. And I'm wondering if we could have just a quick lightning round, Baylee first and Amanda second. Last words on what it is that you're most excited about regarding the future of your farm business. I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
You want to go first, Amanda?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I thought he had handed you the wand. So I mean, basically, we've got 7 decades of legacy in this community and in this state, with a commitment to producing food, and so much of what we do is looking ahead to the future, and realizing that we have a growing population and we have a changing climate, and so to be able to keep on being a reliable source of protein and vegetables, and I mean, whatever it is that this farm is going to be making, it might not be milk in 5 or 6 years, I don't know, but it is our decisions and commitment to caring for that land base and the water that runs through our farm is with the intent of there being food that's being grown here. And we have been very fortunate to have a relationship with Connecticut Farmland Trust and the Department of Agriculture and NRCS to be able to protect at least half of the farmland that we use, so that it will be agricultural in perpetuity. And there was one other question that Kimball had recognized in leading up to this, was what would you recommend to new and beginning farmers? And I would say, get to know the farmers that are already here. Get to know who the network and the community is. Know Connecticut Farm Bureau, Connecticut Farmland Trust, Department of Agriculture, Yukon Extension. There is some incredible resources that are right here. You don't have to go searching for them. They're here and they're ready to talk and engage.
All right, Baylee, any last words?
Yeah, so what I'm really excited about on my farm is becoming a full diet farm. So I want to grow everything that we can possibly grow and feed my neighbors all of the essential nutrients that they need, while bringing farmland that has recently been abandoned, which is land trust property in my town. There's about 15 acres they've entrusted to us, while turning that land from invasive weeds and low amounts of organic matter sequestered in the soil into regenerative pasture land that's sequestering a ton of carbon in the soil and having a very plentiful, bountiful grazing and haying operation, and having some small areas for grains, so that someday my farm could give you everything that you need. That's what I'm excited about.
That is
While
so
being closing the loop and recycling our nutrients.
All right, well, we have no minutes left, and I really appreciate you staying for as long as you can. If you've enjoyed this hour and have suggestions for the future, would like to hear more from from farmers, watch for an email from me shortly after we sign off of this Zoom. I'm going to send you a short survey asking for your feedback. And there are more webinars. We touched a little bit on climate change. We've got a workshop next week that Elizabeth Moore is leading a conversation with Kip Kolosinskis, the soil scientist, and Jamie Jones from Jones Family Farm, talking about climate change in agriculture. It's going to be really good. FarmLink, our program that connects farmers to farmland, Maddie Dress is going to have her own workshop next week as well. If you go to the website that's on the screen right now, you'll be able to find a link to register for all or any of them. And of course, if you have questions about CFT or interested in connecting to any of the other people that are here today, feel free to give me a call. My number is up there on the screen. It's 860-247-0202, extension 223, or kcartwright@ctfarmland.org. You can reach me that way as well. And I really appreciate all of you for coming, and I hope none of you have lost your jobs as a result of staying past your lunch break, and that you have a wonderful Thursday and a wonderful weekend. Take care, everybody.